Welcome back. For Steve Selig, family is paramount, and values passed down from generations back would not only shape his life, but an entire city as well. If you live in Atlanta, you've no doubt walked or driven past a Selig property or parked in one of several Selig-owned lots. But for company president and chairman Steve Selig, the path from son of a prominent family to leader of one of Atlanta's largest real estate development companies took a lot of turns. He talks about it in today's Executive Profiles.
Let's go back to the early 1900s and talk about your grandfather, Ben Massell, because I think pretty much that's kind of where this generational thing really started to take shape.
Yeah, my grandfather came to Atlanta in the late 1800s. He got into real estate very early in his life. The first real estate transaction we could find was 1918, that he bought something or sold something. I'm not even sure at this moment. But from there, he made quite a name for himself. I never had the honor and the pleasure of working with him because he died when I was in college. So I just knew him as my grandfather, who would always tell me great stories, and I could sit on his lap and that sort of thing in my earlier days. But he left quite a legacy.
Speak about your father for a moment, because again, coming off of your grandfather, he picked up the
he did.
And moved forward.
Well, my dad started out in the chemical business, ultimately Selig Chemical Industries. And my dad ran that for I don't know how many years. When my grandfather died, my dad sold the chemical business to National Service Industries, and then he came over to the real estate part. When my dad came over, we subsequently bought out Ben Massell Jr. and formed Selig Enterprises out of CMS Realty and the Massell companies. But my dad was a great guy. My dad was a very detail-oriented guy. I'm not really so detail-oriented. I remember asking Dad one time when we were working together, I said, Dad, I don't know how you do it. I don't know how you're able to know all these little intricate details, like how much the soap in the dispenser cost, or little things like that. And he said, Steve, don't worry about it. You can hire somebody to do that. You're good with people. That's what you need to do. That was a life lesson for me. And to this day, I remember it as something that was very important to me.
So it's 1965. You get your degree, well earned, from the University of Georgia.
Right.
And it's time to go in the family business.
Well, it was almost time to go in the family business. I spent a year at what was then National Bank of Georgia. And then after a year working in their mortgage loan department, then I went into the family business. And what I did was leasing, basically. I was in charge of all the leasing for the company. And from there, I worked with my dad for almost 20 years before his death in 1986.
Talk for a couple of minutes about your political history.
It's a pleasure for me to be back out here.
I was asked in 1975 to meet a former Georgia governor named Jimmy Carter, who was running for president. My dad and I had lunch with him. I was never so impressed with anyone in my life as I was that day with Jimmy Carter. He asked me if I would come work for him, which I did. And when he won the election, he invited me to come and work in the White House. And my primary job was to work with the business community, trying to get them to support our policies. And when they didn't support our policies, try to mute the criticism. I left the White House about a year out and went over to the re-election campaign, was national campaign chairman for the re-election campaign, which, by the way, is how I got into the rock and roll business, because that's one of the ways we raised money for Jimmy Carter, was through concerts. When people like Willie Nelson wanted to help him, they would give concerts. I owned a company with Alex Cooley and Peter Conlon called Concert Southern Promotions.
The business today is gigantic. You got over 10 million square feet of property. It's in about every dimension of real estate you could ever go into.
We are unusual in that we have almost an equal amount of retail, industrial, office, some vacant land, and that actually was a plan of ours. And our philosophy has been a conservative one. We try not to over-leverage. We try not to be too heavily in debt. We're not dependent on any one segment of the business.
Why has a private company like yours been as successful as it's been, realizing that so many have gone down that road and are not with us anymore?
Well, it may sound trite, but First of all, we have excellent people working for us. We try to treat our employees as if they're part of our family. And so our average employee length is probably over 20 years, which is very unusual in the real estate business. The second reason, as I mentioned earlier, is we've not overextended ourselves. We've been conservative. We've looked for opportunities. And you know what? When you get involved in the community, when you get involved in civic and charitable and religious and that sort, when you get involved in the community, it comes back to you.
Speak a little bit more about the philanthropy piece, because the list is a mile long.
We have supported very heavily in the Jewish community. Mm-hmm. And the reason for that is that we have learned, unfortunately over the years, not so much today, but in the past, that if we don't take care of our own, we could never count on anyone else to do it for us. But in addition, we've supported very heavily the arts. We've been involved with United Way. We've been involved in a lot of the disease charities such as cancer.
What words of advice do you have for those who are involved in family business and entrepreneurial business that have stood the test of time?
Be true to yourself. Hire and surround yourself with really, really good people. One time I was with somebody and I was envious of what they'd accomplished. And I said to them, how do you do everything you've done? You know, I can't believe, where do you get the smarts, the money, the know-how to do this stuff? And he looked at me and he said, Steve, right now I'd give anything in the world to trade places with you. And about 2 months later, they declared bankruptcy. And that taught me something. Do what you do well. Don't worry about what other people do. Just take care of your own house. And that's a lesson that was very important to me in my life.
Steve Selig doesn't look to be slowing anytime soon. His company was hired by the city of Sandy Springs to revamp an old commercial area into a walkable downtown district. He recently received the 2014 Four Pillar Tribute. It honors leaders who have had an impact on the Atlanta region.